book of Philippians will start our story. In Philippians 1, let me have a reader starting at the 22nd verse. Philippians 1:22.
But if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor, yet what I shall choose, I won't not. For I am in a strait too, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better.
Hear the words of truth today. The Bible declares unto us a message. Paul speaking to the church at Philippi. Like Paul, God has given us rest from our past way of working. Paul said, but if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor. In other words, the way I live will show to the people publicly the fruit of my labor. The way that I live. Songwriter said, let the way that I live speak for me. And that's what Paul is saying here. He said, if I live in the flesh, the fruit of my labor is going to say what? I live in the flesh. If I live in the spirit, then the fruit of my labor will say what? I live in the spirit. But he says here, yet what I shall choose, I would not. In other words, he's giving light to a challenge that God's people are confronted with every day. And he goes on to talk about that challenge in that 23rd verse. He said, I am in a strait. Think about somebody walking a fine line between right and wrong. I have a desire to do what God said through Jesus Christ, but what I want to choose, he's saying, I don't choose. So this is the challenge that God's people are faced with every day. God has given us rest from our past way of working or playing the game. We must recognize a different approach to dealing with life challenges is needed every day. So when we are confronted with this fine line of decision making, we confidently know what decisions we need to make and not be unsure. And the only way we can be confident about the decision that we should make, because that fine line, we're going to find ourselves walking that fine line every day. The only way we can be confident is for us to know how to play the game. Everybody that gets up out of their bed every day is confronted with this fine line that Paul is talking about here. We are one decision away from choosing right, and also one decision away from choosing what? Wrong. That's what Paul is saying. And whichever we choose, it's going to be fruit, whether it's fruit to righteousness or fruit to unrighteousness. What that translates into for our everyday lives is either going to be decisions that are going to be made that's going to do good things for our life, or decisions that are going to be made that are going to do bad things for our life. Herein is where the game is played. Because what we must recognize is that you're going to have these life challenges every day. Every day. We must first acknowledge that the decision point exists. See, if we walk around every day not even acknowledging that this is the dilemma or this is the challenge that we are faced with every day, then we'll be like Paul said. He said, I'm making decisions to do things that I really don't want to what? Do. And that happens when we are not focused in on what's actually happening, which means that you are not sure about what game is being played. If you don't know the rules of the game, how can you be effective at the game? Is everybody with me? So first, we must acknowledge that this decision point exists. It's active right at this moment. You can choose to stay focused on what we're talking about, or you can choose to think about all the other cares in the world. Is everybody with me? See, this decision point is something that we must be conscious of every day of our life, because therein lies whether or not you have rest or whether or not you have unrest. Therein is also where the game is played. Think about it. If you were on a basketball court and you're going down the court, you're supposed to be in the game, but you're thinking about, because this decision, this fine line doesn't care where you are. You're thinking about something that happened in class, or you're thinking about something that happened to you on the job, or you're thinking about something that happened to you at home. You're thinking about something that happened to you in the community. And you're on this court and you're playing basketball. How effective are you going to be at the game that you're currently playing if you're not focused on it? Is everybody with me? So your decision to allow those things to cloud your judgment, to cloud your decision making, is going to determine what kind of fruit you're going to bear on that court. This happens to professionals all the time, because although they're professionals, they're also people first. And just like we get confronted with challenges and decisions, this happens to us every day, it happens to them every day as well. And if one of them were to say that these things never come under their mind, the challenges of their life never come into their mind when they get on that court, I tell them that they were lying. Because we are human beings. The only way that we can be effective, though, at the game is to make sure that we first acknowledge that that decision point exists. See, our daily reflex, we have a daily reflex action, leads us the way that we used to do things in the past. It'll cause us to react to those situations the way we used to in the past. If, for instance, if you're used to going to a certain teacher class and teachers start talking after a couple of minutes, and then next thing you're used to just zoning out and be zoned out. For the next, you look outside the window for 5 minutes, and then you look at something on the wall for 5 minutes, and then next thing you know, class is almost over by the time you finish. But you can get into a practice to where that begins to be the routine. Just like people they have the same thing that happen at work. It can be the same kind of thing. The point is that we have a reflex action that leads us to yield a certain kind of results. See, because that not being focused cause you to get a certain kind of grade. The same thing happens when people at work. That kind of lack of focus causes them to get a certain evaluation, performance evaluation. Is everybody with me? So our daily reflex actions lead us to react to things in the way that we used to do in the past, which yields the results that we got from the past. Those results, in many cases, are tied with situations that bring sorrow and not rest. See, the results we get from our game that we play is a result of the effort that we put into playing. I'm going to say that again. The results that you get from the game is a result of the effort that you put into playing. So, if while you're playing the game, if you're so distracted, you can't get good results, can you? You've even often heard players say they had a bad game, haven't you? It's not that their talent left them. It's just that these decisions, the game of life, and these challenges cause them to deal with things in a different way. And so, therefore, some days are more effective than others. The same thing happens with people at work and also at school. But the more we recognize that decision point exists, the more we can begin to leverage control over it. Let's look at what the Bible goes on to tell us here in 2 Corinthians 5. Let's go over there, please. In 2 Corinthians, the 5th chapter, let's read starting at the first verse, please.
For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, an house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens.
Continue, please.
For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. If so be that being clothed we shall not be found naked. For we that are in this tabernacle do groan, being burdened, not for that we would be unclothed, but clothed upon that mortality might be swallowed up of life.
And grab that 5th verse, please.
Now he that hath wrought us for the selfsame thing is God, who also hath given unto us the earnest of the Spirit.
Hear the words of God today. The Bible declared unto us in the book of Corinthians that in our earthly house there is no peace. I mean, who wants to go to heaven? Normally, when somebody asks the question, the reaction is, I do. Why? Why do you want to go to heaven? Well, primarily because heaven offers peace. Heaven offers no heavy burdens to carry. How many of you ever carried a heavy box or a heavy bag? I remember when I was little, we used to have to go to wash clothes at the laundromat, and I used to have to carry these heavy laundry baskets, a couple of blocks. But it was heavy. I had to carry it though. And as long as I was carrying it, it was on my mind. When you're carrying something heavy, it stays on your mind, doesn't it? Sometimes it stays so much on your mind that it's hard for anything else to get in your mind. It's hard for you to concentrate on anything else, isn't it? Living on earth in enemy territory offers no peace. We are in enemy territory. And so therefore, it offers no peace. And the way that it happens when you are trying to live your life on a daily basis. In a war, you must compete in the game in order to get good results. Getting good results enable you to live in peace. And even when people talk about going to war, they talk about going to war in the name of creating after the war what is considered to be some peace. Have you ever noticed that connection? Well, when you're in war, you must compete in the game. It's not optional. If you don't compete in the game called war, what happens? You lose in more ways than one. So you must compete in the game known as war. Haven't you even heard war referred to as a game? War games, have you heard that expression before? Because it is. It is a game. So if it's not optional to compete in an actual war, when you are in that war, if you believe that you're in enemy territory, you must also know that it is not optional for you to compete in this spiritual war. And that's what these verses just told us. The reason why people desire to go to heaven, because they're trying to do what these verses say. In their tabernacle, they get tired of the war, the game that they play every day in this life. And so therefore, they desire, especially those who have an opportunity to go to heaven, they desire to be with the Lord. See, it's the burdens, excuse me, like that heavy laundry basket I used to carry, that was on my mind until I got it to the laundromat. And once I got to the laundromat and I was able to put it down, I felt what? How do you think I felt after I put it down? Relieved, felt lighter. I felt hot because I was sweating for carrying it for so long. And I could think about other things other than about setting this basket down once I got to where I was going. And that's the way many times people feel about burdens in their life, but they don't know how to sit it down. So what do you think happens? The burden is what's in the forefront of their life every day. So much so that they're not able to effectively play the game. And so the game, the results they get in the game begin to get worse because of the burden that they carry. They worry when they're worrying about things. That's a burden being carried when you worry. Does that still stop the game from being played around you? No matter how much a person worries about a situation, does that stop the game from being played around you by others? Does that stop the enemy from attacking in a war, in a real war? Just because you are not sure of the rules of the game, or if you decide you don't want to compete, does that stop the enemy from attacking if you're in a real war? No, it does not. It makes you more vulnerable. They can't hear you. So when we as children of God give up and don't want to compete, don't want to play the game, we become more vulnerable to the wiles of the devil. We don't have an option. We're in enemy territory. And if you believe as a child of God that you're in enemy territory, you don't have an option not to fight. You don't have an option not to compete. You don't have an option not to play the game. So it is not an option for us to live this life and not learn how to effectively play this game called life. The Bible says, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. The knowledge helps God's people understand how to apply truths. And when you apply truths, that's a sign of understanding. It's also a sign that you are effective in playing the game. But the Bible said, my people, meaning God's people, are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. If we don't believe we've got to compete, then we can't be effective at the game, and therefore we become more vulnerable, and as a result, the enemy will find you and challenge you and try to destroy you. If you don't play the game called life, the only thing that you can have is not peace. And if you don't have peace, then what do you have? You have sorrow. Is everybody with me? See, it's one thing to know and be confident in the fact. See, I was confident in the fact that eventually that burden that I was carrying, that laundry basket, it was going to be lifted. I knew that I was going to have some relief at some point in time. And no matter how many times along the way I may have stopped the rest, I still had to keep up with that burden until I was able to unload it. And so we must recognize that just because when a challenge comes to us, We have to know how to effectively deal with the challenge. Remember the decision that Paul talked about. Every day we walk that thin line. And he said when he would make the right decision, he may want to make the right decision, but sometimes he makes the wrong decision. And what the Bible is telling us here is that when we recognize that we have that decision point, we must also recognize that we must play the game, because playing the game will teach us to make the right decisions as we go through the day. It'll keep us from ending up in a place where sorrow resides. It'll keep us in a place where God's peace resides.
Oh, praise be to God, from whom all blessings flow. It is our prayer at Clay Family Ministries that your life has been increased with the increase of God through this study. We appreciate and are thankful for your fellowship during this life skills study segment.